where we look at three of the latest publications by Grove Books. Each gives a 10,000 word introduction to a subject relevant to the church and its mission, exploring the practical issues and finding out what the Bible has to say about them. There are three of us in the Grove Bites team: myself, Richard Steele, Alex Guest and Steve Morris. We hope the books we have for you today will be interesting, stimulating and informative as we move into 2021. Alex has been talking to Tim Goff of Youth for Christ Wales, who's brought together a group of experts to write Youth Ministry Online. This is an exploration of the strengths and pitfalls of the most common social media platforms used by teenagers. Steve has put on his virtual walking boots and spoken with Helen Bent, Head of Ministerial Training for the Royal School of Church Music, on her latest book, Exploring Worship in Pilgrimage. And I talked with Pete Phillips, Director of the Centre for Digital Theology at Durham University, and also Premier Christian Media's Head of Digital Theology. He's written Hybrid Church, which also brings together reflections from others actively involved in creating church for the contemporary world. Now, for this particular topic, all three of us have been involved with wrestling with the practicalities and possibilities of church under the current restrictions. And for Alex, there was the extra complication of starting a new job within this period.
Yes, starting a new post, two churches to lead as well. It's been tough. It's been a real challenge and lots of things to learn, but lots of things to learn without having the time and the build up and the lead into it, and having to just learn off the cuff. It has been fantastic in terms of outreach, and we've found that we're able to reach members of the community who usually wouldn't go to church. And then in between the times of lockdown, when we have briefly been worshipping in person, we found that we were also having to still continue engaging digitally for those who were shielding. So it has been a real learning curve. It has had its challenges and its tears, but lots of celebration as well, and lots of accessibility, which is something we definitely need to celebrate in the church.
That's interesting. And Steve, what about yourself? Similar or different?
Yeah, similar really. I mean, I was quite a technophobe, I think, to begin with, and I've learned so much. I'm very glad to have done so. I mean, and I've really enjoyed it. You know, I actually really enjoy the services via Zoom. I found them, you know, we found them very funny because things have gone wrong and we've had a bit of a laugh and people have enjoyed that kind of sense of adventuring together. So I think a lot of it's here to stay, and I feel pretty positive about it.
Yeah, I think people have got quite forgiving, haven't they, about the technical quality. And as Pete said in his book, beginning of March, very few churches are on, and suddenly almost the entire, well, not just the Church of England, but every church was bounced onto this new digital. And generally speaking, people feel it's gone quite well. I've got a clip from Pete's book because he covered quite a wide range of areas. He's been involved in this network for at least 10 years now. But one thing he said, was looking at, was that it's not just the local. Most of us are concerned for our local church, aren't we, our local congregation. But of course, people are coming to our services from maybe further afield. But he was also making the point about actually the digital world allows different voices to be shared in a new way.
I'm just a 50-year-old, 50-plus-year-old bearded white man. And there are so many really good other people from other ethnic minorities worldwide, and women who are great scholars who need to be doing the talking. And it's kind of getting the right balance between saying, yeah, I can do that, and no, somebody else should do that.
Yeah, so it's kind of opening things up. I mean, the connections between both academics and around the world through the church, I think it's taken a real leap forward, hasn't it? Through.
Yeah, that's right. When we first went on, I joined Theology Quarantined, which is a Facebook group of mostly Catholic scholars from the States. But that really opened then. They started doing videos, and you've interviewed me and others, and that then opened up Catholic scholarship to digital scholarship. And so, things were joined up there, and then ecumenical dialogue around Europe has really opened up to different conversations. So digital kind of provides that kind of catalyst for networking that's worked so well.
I thought it was really interesting that Pete was talking about this networking opportunity, because certainly I've been to I wouldn't say 10 times as many conferences this year as I've been to previous years, but you can just do that, can't you? You can drop in for an hour or two. If it's a bit boring, you can carry on your email on the side as well. It's a totally different way of getting involved with things. But I have found and heard far more voices, breadth of voices and so on than I think I've seen and heard in many, many years. Again, I don't know, is that true of your experience?
I've definitely began to network in new ways and speaking to new people, because all of a sudden the power and the weight of expertise has shifted, and it's no longer just the liturgists who I consult about how I conduct my services, but I'm having to consult those who are digitally engaged. And in terms of enabling new voices, I found in my congregation members who wouldn't usually be involved in the worship, leading of worship in church, are very comfortable, very able to lead parts of our worship in a digital sphere.
That's been really interesting. I've heard that a lot, that people who wouldn't read or say a prayer in church, much happier to do so online, because it's really interesting. Again, Steve, have you found that as well?
Yeah, I have, and I think also we've been like linking up with other local churches and sharing things. So sometimes we'll say, you know, someone said, "I really like your service. Can we use that? Can we use that instead, for instance, or can we do this or other things for us?" And I think that's been really, really encouraging. I mean, there are now maybe 5 or 6 churches, all linked, all helping each other. And you know, I've long thought that it's far too isolating and lonely, the job of being a vicar. I've long thought that the need for teamwork and information sharing is right up there, and this has brought it about, really.
Yeah, and I wonder if that will make longer changes. People talking about the new normal, and I think Tim Goff in his one, he says not sure that's even a word you can use now because you're not there yet. But I like to think that another barrier that's been broken down is this sort of sharing economy, and that you're now part of something much bigger than you were. You don't have to do everything on your own. And to me, that's one of the real positives about hybrid church, certainly, you know, and the way forward that, yeah, new voices locally as well as internationally, and actually just breaking down the walls that we put up sometimes between our different churches. And clearly, Steve, that's been your experience. Do you think that'll stick?
I really hope so. You know, it isn't just the churches, though. It's also, we're in an area which is predominantly Hindu and Sikh. And so on our WhatsApp prayer group, we've got people on there from those communities who used to come to Memory Cafe, and they've been posting the most lovely prayers and thanks. And I think that's absolutely astounding. I mean, I could never have imagined we'd have done that. And that's the kind of thing that really fills me full of hope for it. She was doing a walk, the St. Cuthbert's Way, I think it's 60 something miles, and it was just going to be a walk. And as she went on the walk with her friends, it became a pilgrimage. They began to sing hymns. They began to think about poetry and liturgy and special spiritual places to stop off. So what had looked like a holiday was still a holiday, but became something much deeper. And I think that's a really interesting idea. I mean, she points out that from after the Reformation, pilgrimages became not particularly well thought of in the Protestant church. But actually, I think her call is to rediscover pilgrimage. I mean, the one thing I would say is that I think that's kind of on the money, because even secular people understand it. They'll go to Graceland, right, to go and see where Elvis was. They'll go to the Emirates Stadium to visit, to go and watch Arsenal. You know, these are all pilgrimages in their way. They're special journeys with a transformative end in sight. So I think I'd like to even broaden out even still further the idea of pilgrimage, claim it if you like.
Okay, let's listen to a little bit of Helen's story, you know, why it had that impression on her.
We set off on the St. Cuthbert's Way as a walk with friends, 3 vicars and a friend from New Zealand. And we stopped off at Durham Cathedral on our way up to Melrose to start the walk off, and visited Cuthbert's tomb and Cuthbert's chapel there. And we spent some time praying there as we set off. And I think that actually set the tone for the rest of the walk. And then I think the thing that really nailed it for me was actually walking across the sand to Holy Island. And we walked in a howling gale with driving rain. And I think for me, I felt like a real pilgrim. If I'd been in shorts and t-shirt and it's been gloriously sunny, I don't think it would have the same impact.
Now, I'm interested in that, and I'm wondering about this book because that was obviously particularly aimed at people of faith. And you, Steve, earlier mentioned about pilgrimage to Gracelands or the Emirates Stadium or whatever. But also there's a wider interest in pilgrimage, isn't there? Because there's the celebrities who walk the Camino, the Compostela route, isn't there? I think there's been at least 2 series on television, and most of those people don't have faith. So I wonder why pilgrimage has become something so much just in ether. People are wanting to find out more, but I wonder why that is. Because a lot of people without faith are going on something that they almost describe, or they would describe, as a pilgrimage.
But I think I'd say, first of all, a lot of people who don't have faith do have faith. So
Okay.
so many people just don't name it as faith. So from millions of regular people, they often get a sense of something beyond themselves. They'll get a sense of sudden love or whatever it might be, and that's God, right? So God, the Holy Spirit's out there in faith in people who don't profess faith. So I think that's one of the things that I would say. And I think there is a real yearning for doing something significant. I mean, most of us were sick of shopping before this happened. We wanted something that was deeper, that kind of changed us. And I think the narrative of most of Hollywood, most novels, is about transformation. You start it in one place and at the end you're different. That's what pilgrimage is about. So I think that I'd like to claim the holiness and godliness of everyday people who don't proclaim faith. And I'd like to claim the holiness of pilgrimage.
Alex, what's your thought? Have you ever been on pilgrimage yourself?
I have, but nothing formal or nothing that's pushed me as far as something like the St. Cuthbert's Way or the Camino. But I hear and acknowledge the world seems to be fascinated with the act of pilgrimage. But I also agree with Steve. I think some people have faith, they don't name it as faith, or they don't quite know it. But something that we all do as humans is speak about journeys, because we see time chronologically and in a linear fashion. And so we think of ourselves on a journey, we think of phases of life, rites of passage, and that's caught up in faith for us and the way that we as the church analyze it. But I think it's also instinctive to humans and built into the way we are designed as humans. And I suppose the way that I reconcile that idea that everybody is taking a journey, and are we trying to over Christianize it or keep it as a Christian thing and make separate that from the journey that everybody else takes? Well, actually, you look at something like Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8, and he meets this eunuch on a journey, but he's only there for part of the journey and then is gone. And so everybody walks a journey, and the church's role is not to over kind of Christianize that and to kind of keep that as something that other people can't participate in, but to recognize that sometimes those journeys will cross over. And as Steve says, transformation takes place on those journeys as well.
Really interesting. I was reading something else, and someone was saying that curates, she was talking with curates, this was a bishop speaking, and she said she spoke to them before they were ordained, and they told their stories naturally. She spoke to them once they were ordained, and they sort of changed the language, and it had gone up a notch or two in religious speak. And I think that's just the wrong kind of thing. And I suppose back to pilgrimage, I love the Celtic, the Northern Saints, and I'm glad she picked up Cuthbert and people like that, and Aidan and others, because there's something really down to earth about that aspect. And I wonder if that might be something that by doing it, might be pilgrimage, might be sort of forest church, it might be other ways, connecting with the kind of language and the feeling and the spirituality of people today is actually a way forward for us.
Absolutely. And I think we need to admit when we need to be more down to earth. That for over the summer, I went to Iona, and I went through a few of the Scottish islands, and kind of taking the ferry over to Iona, there's this real sense of anticipation, and I'm going to have this real religious experience. And I got there and I was not let down by it, and I think it is still a really special place, but there was this almost anti-climax of, okay, so here we are on an island, a small community that doesn't have internet signal if you ever want to go.
There's 100 yards on one road, Alex. I know, I found it, I've been there myself.
But I really had to battle with myself, thinking, well, why do I feel like I'm so let down? And perhaps I've over spiritualized or set my expectations of what a spiritual encounter is and what pilgrimage is. And I think you're absolutely right, Richard. We need to be a bit more down to earth sometimes and say pilgrimages are not always glamorous. I don't think they were supposed to be glamorous in the first place. And so we should not be so glamorous in our retelling of those pilgrimages as well.
Okay, we better move on to your book. And again, it's using well, contemporary, it's the software and the apps, isn't it? And it's a very practical book, isn't it? This book by Tim Goff. So tell us, Alex, a little bit about the book.
Yeah, really practical, really helpful. It kind of covers the few social media platforms it covers in particular are Zoom, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And there's also this new one coming out, Twitch. And I said, things are changing so quickly. Even I'm part of a generation that doesn't use TikTok. So I don't understand that. So it was really good to have some basis of an understanding of what goes on and how the church can get involved with youth ministry, and also some real understanding of why that echoes some of the tools that have been employed and engaged by youth ministers and church leaders all the way back to Jesus. So I found that really helpful.
If I, as a youth worker, spent the next 50 years of my life speaking to huge crowds of young people and every year saw 50 young people come to Christ, it'd be amazing. It'd be 1,500 kids come to Jesus, size of a school. But if instead I spent 2 years focusing on just 3 young people and teaching them to do the same, 2 things would happen. The first thing would happen is I'd get fired because 3 young people is a rubbish youth group. But the second thing that would happen is you'd see the entire population of the earth saved in half my lifetime. At some point you go, why are we wasting our time trying to create a big en masse crowd event for everybody when there's enough of us living Christians right now who could really do deep generational, local, personal, community-driven work with a small number? And if we all did it, church suddenly starts working, mission suddenly starts working. So of course you can have 4 young people on a Zoom meeting every week with no band and no lights and no crazy gizmos. As long as you do it consistency, you lead with the gospel and you build community and you show that you care, I think it can work.
It's a little bit like the chessboard analogy, I think, there, isn't it? That example. You put 1 grain of rice on the first one and 2 on the second one, and by the 64th square, there's not enough rice in the world to do it.
Yes.
And it's mind-boggling.
Pyramid.
I thought his point was, let's go sort of deeper with a few than broadcast all this clever stuff to the wider group. I thought that was fascinating, Alex.
Yes.
How did you pick that up? And then Steve, you do come in as well.
I thought it was great, and it reminded me of the conversation I'd had with James Lawrence about his Grove book about leading well with others and why teams are not always the answer. And he speaks about having 3 people to minister to, which I know some people have apprehensions about, but actually when Tim was explaining, if we really invest in these 3 to be able to communicate, to be able to evangelize, then imagine the transformative power of that, rather than sitting in our studies and feeling complete techno envy of some of the more equipped and more capable churches who are reaching far more people. How about we look at our local context and those who have already gathered before us and who have already offered themselves to be mentored by us? We should really invest in them.
Yeah, and Steve, that seemed to spark a chord with you as well, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in this kind of remnant period. At the end of this COVID thing, there are going to be a lot fewer people in church, right? So we have no option other than to work with a smaller group of people. And I actually don't think that's a bad thing, because I think we can work one-to-one with a small group of people, and then we just start again. Because what's happened is a lot of the kind of people who were just not really that interested will stop coming. So I think it's just acknowledging the way the world is going to be. And I've always thought that there's nothing wrong with small. It's absolutely fine. I mean, the Christian church for the first 300 years was a tiny, minuscule thing that met mainly in people's houses. I mean, it was little more than a home group in most places. So that's all right. If it's okay for them, it's okay for us.
And yet it did grow, and it almost defeated the political and religious system of the whole Roman Empire. And the picture in China, again, it started small, but at some point it grows. So this balance of the mega, and with Tim's book, he was saying, we could be as creative we like and throw a lot of money on it, but actually most of us aren't in those kind of churches. So would you say this was a book, Alex, for the small church or the bigger church, or both?
I think it's applicable to both really, and there is a section of tips, and one of the tips that I highly rate, well, two of them are to, one, create a safe space for those young people, and that covers a number of things, but also to be authentic. If you are authentically a great church that's full of lots of people and you've got all of the technology to do big things, do big things. But if you're a smaller church, you're still a great church and you can still do great youth work and youth ministry. So I thought it was fantastic. And another thing that Tim did say that I didn't quite catch in video, unfortunately, but I promised myself I would bring it up now, was that young people are able to take a leading role in pioneering the way, into shaping the church in a way that we have perhaps not, we may have given credence to it just by words and said before, oh, we want the young people to lead and to show us the way. But now we really have no choice. If we don't know what TikTok is, we have no choice. But Tim did remind me that whilst they may be the experts and they may be more informed than us, they are still young people and they still need mentoring and leading themselves. So making sure that we strike the balance and don't overload them with work and expect them to initiate a great change if we're not willing to be involved in leading and inducting that change as well.
So we've got two books that really want to use digital and physical in both of them, particularly in the Highbury Church book, to bring people together in a new way. And then we've got one book, Steve, haven't we, that maybe it's on your own or maybe it's with a group, but there's sort of group, mainly pilgrimage is a group thing, isn't it, I think? And then maybe all three of these are a bit like that.
Yeah, I think it is a group thing. It's just one thing I'd like to say is that I really love this idea of younger people. When I was in business, we've loads of top companies, right? But you go into a meeting, say at Sainsbury head office, and really senior positions were held by people in their early 20s. Right, they were doing stuff like mega deals on buying, and it was extraordinary how the private sector sets young people free and how the church doesn't. And I think that's something we just have got to learn from them, because I used to love working as an entrepreneur, because you just see young people like 10 years ahead of people in the church who are still just doing the PowerPoint on a Sunday.
Perhaps that's a subject for another Grow book. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Alex. So I hope you'll go and look at the three larger versions of the Grow Bites videos that are on those three books. But for now, thank you for being with us, and goodbye.
Goodbye.